Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel and a brand new playlist now that the hood is off the slipway and I can start with the next maritime project, which is this Revell 144 scale Flower Class Corvette, and I'll be using the Pontos detail set with this as well. The project's been delayed not just because the hood has taken so long to finish, but because this particular Pontos set is faulty. Some of the etch brass has been damaged and there's one or two parts missing from it. And I've been waiting nearly 4 months now for the retailer BNA in Australia to send me some replacement parts. And after a lot of badgering, I managed to get them to send some. Whether or not it's a full set or not, I don't know. It might just be the replacement frets that are damaged. But they've just arrived in the country today, so hopefully they'll be with me in the next couple of days. And I've now got the confidence to set off with the project. So I'll be starting in this episode with the hull build. But the first thing I'm going to do is to get rid of this horrible Revell box. As a lot of us know, Revell persist in providing the kits in these end opening boxes, which are absolutely no good at all for storing the parts or the model once you've started it. So I'm going to do something about that straight away and get the parts into an open tray so that I can see more easily what I'm looking at. You can see that the hull's taped together here. That's because I've done a review of the Revell kit quite a while ago now, so if you want to see what is in store in terms of the Revell plastic, you can go back and have a look at that video. The link for that video is showing now above on the screen. And today what I want to do is to get the hull properly assembled, get the transom fitted, and I think we're alright to fit the decks as well, so we'll just check the Pontos instructions for that. So I'll just tape the box together. So I'll just take the sides of the box together, open the lid up, and we've got what we should have had in the first place, which is a top opening box. Much easier, Revell. The next thing I'm going to do is just to label the sprues up a little bit more clearly so that they're easier to see in the box. So we just attach a little bit of masking tape onto them and just label them like that so that they're pretty easy to see, so we're not scrabbling around for the parts. So that's just a 5-minute job that makes it much more easy to find the parts on the sprues when you want them. So that's all sorted. The other thing that I've done, having learned from the experience of the hood build, is to look after the Pontos instructions a little bit better. At the end of the hood build, the Pontos instructions were in complete tatters and I had trouble finding them. So what I've done this time with the Flower Class Pontos instructions is just mount them in an A3 folder. It's a wallet with plastic sleeves in, so each instruction sheet's protected now inside that folder, and hopefully it'll last the duration of the build. Certainly I struggled towards the end of the hood build and I had to resort to looking at the instructions on the internet where I'd completely damaged the instruction sheet. So hopefully this will be a bit better. The only slight problem with that is that the Pontos instructions are actually, the pages are in no order. It goes from page 2, page 3, so far so good. And then the next page is page 10, which is upside down, page 4, which is okay, and page 9, which is upside down as well. So why they couldn't be printed just sequentially, I've no idea. But there we are, just a little bit of confusion for us to deal with. but at least the instructions will be protected. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to have to do is to sort out the Revell decks. They need to have some of the plastic mouldings cleared out from them, and that's to allow the fitting at a later stage of the Pontos brass parts. Pontos do give us some instruction as to which parts of plastic need to be removed. So the forecastle deck is covered on the first page of the instructions. There's a diagram to tell us what to do there. So we'll get over to the bench and get the plastic cleared that we don't need. Okay, so I've marked up the deck, both of them. So actually in the Pontos instructions, this deck is marked in terms of what plastic needs to be removed, but this one isn't. So you've got to work that out from the instructions. But basically what we have to remove here are the racks for the depth charge stowage down the sides here. These are the base plates for the depth charge throwers, both port and starboard. So they all need to be cleared. So to clear these, I don't think I'm going to need to resort to the drill and a burr. I'll just use a chisel-edged knife blade and then finish it off with a curve-edged knife blade, and let's just see if we can get this cleared up. It's much easier to do this clearance work now with the decks on the bench rather than fitted to the ship, particularly on the Flower Class, because the sides of the ship are so high that it reduces the amount of leverage that you've got to get this plastic removed. So it's much easier and safer to do it on the bench. So I'll get rid of the bulk of the moulding with the chisel blade. Just want to be careful getting rid of these because they come very close to this moulding here, which appears to be a walkway. I think it's probably covered in some sort of anti-slip material. And it's just slightly relief from the deck, so I want to be careful to preserve that. This is deck moulding here, and it'll be replaced with some wooden deck in the Pontos set. So I want to, it doesn't tell us to remove this, but I will get it down to deck level. You could put the wooden deck over the top of the moulding, but the trouble with that is that there are ridges representing the planking, and that will mean that you don't have a complete glue surface. So rather than risk the deck lifting, I'm going to get that down to flat plastic. So once the majority of the plastic is removed, I'll just go back in with this curved blade and get the moulding down to the deck level. I'll just put a bit of tape over the edge of that walkway actually, just to protect it. So that's the deck cleared. I've managed to preserve this moulding here just. It's pretty difficult to clear the depth charge racks here when they're so close to this non-slip material. The masking will define that a bit better, and also the new depth charge racks will come up pretty close to the edge as well, so it should be disguised pretty okay. There's not as much to do on the forecastle deck. But again, we've got the same problem where we've got this, presumably it's Cortesine or Semtex strip here, and the boat crutches actually go over the side of that, so I'm going to have to be careful with the knife to get rid of those. Just to preserve the edge on these walkways, I'm just going to use a steel rule to remove the remnants of the boat crutch. That'll just keep a nice sharp edge on that. At this stage, I just want to check that Pontos have got this right for this clearance of this plastic, and I'm not absolutely convinced that they have. So I'm going to remove the piece of the forecastle deck that we're going to be fitting in this area, and I'll just overlay it onto the deck just to make sure it's going to fit. Obviously I won't take the plastic backing off this. So I'm glad I test fitted that, because Pontos don't tell us to remove these bases here, and the deck does go over those. When I used to model in the house before I was lucky enough to have this shed outside, the sound that makes, the scraping sound, was one of the things that my wife couldn't stand. She used to hate it, so it's just as well that she's indoors now and she can't hear this, because she'd be complaining about it. So those two pins that I've just removed there aren't in the Pontos instructions either. Nearly there with this. We want to preserve the hosepipe openings here, so I just want to carefully mark off the edge of those, and I'll very gently go up to that mark with the knife. I don't want to go onto the Revell mould in there. There's a brass part here which fits onto the front of the forecastle. You can see the cutouts there where the hosepipe plastic shows through. I will take that brass part actually just to get a proper test fit of it. So we'll just check the deck again. That's all okay, that's a good fit. So just that little test fit there just makes sure that we're not going to run into any problems later on in the build when we actually come to fit the wooden deck. Because if you haven't and you find that you've got an obstruction once you've taken the backing sheet off this, you're in trouble really, because the Pontos glue that's used on these wooden decks is very, very strong, and as soon as there's any contact it's going to stick. So if you're not ready to fit the deck and you find you haven't cleared any little obstructions, then as I say, you're in trouble. I've just got these last few little pieces to get rid of, and then I think we'll be able to start to do the hull assembly. Okay, so I'll put those parts safely to one side now. We're not going to need them for a while. So with the deck prepared and ready, we can look to get this glued up now. There is a bulkhead here which goes amidships, and I think I mentioned in the review of the kit that Revell have moulded these points here along the hull, and originally I thought they were for some cross braces, but there's nothing in the instructions about them, so I don't know what the purpose of them is. And it would have been as well not to have them really, because they've created a little sink mark on the outside of the hull which we'll need to just tidy up a little bit. So I'm not sure. I'm wondering if it's a throwback to the 172 scale Revell Corvette. It may be, but I don't know. I'm not familiar with that kit. But anyway, they serve no purpose in this moulding at all. So we can go in and glue the hull up, and for that I'm going to use some Revell contactor. This gives us plenty of time to locate the parts, and I'm not worried in putting this together that I'm going to get some glue squeezing out. That's absolutely fine. I'll get some more extra thin glue on these just to make sure that it's absolutely set. I'll get a bit more glue in the bow here because it is slightly warped, the moulding, and it'll want to pull apart, so to get a good fix in there. This plastic that Revell have used, I'm not that fond of it really. It's a bit like polythene. It's quite soft and I'm not sure how it's going to sand. Get a bit more glue, it might have dried up a little bit. I've taken a while to get that together. I was a bit ham-fisted with it. It's pulling apart here as well on the keel. You can see here on the stern it's also wanting to pull apart slightly. So I'll just reinforce this bulkhead. That actually provides quite a bit of strength to the model. Okay, so I've managed to get the main hull halves joined together with the bulkhead in the middle, and I've also fitted the transom part, which as you can see is a terrible fit. It fits where it touches, but that's not very often, and what I had to do was to use some sprue goo just to make sure that the join fully set up, and this has had 24 hours now to finally cure. So it's gone together okay in the end, but it required a lot of tape, and you can see the join at the bottom is a little bit rough, so we've got some clean-up work to do with this, and some more work to do around this transom to blend it in. So I'll just give this a little bit of a clean-up now to get rid of the worst of the flash and so on, and then we can see exactly where we've got to do the filling, and we'll get some more sprue goo on the outside and clean up this interior join as well. The thing with sanding this transom down is that I don't want to lose the plating detail on the back, so we just need to be a little bit careful to make sure that we don't damage any of that. So I've started to get the transom into shape with getting the profile right at any rate. But you can see how much work we're going to have to do with this. I'm hoping that this is one of the worst fit issues in the kit, and that the rest is going to be a bit more plain sailing, because this is going to need a little bit of work. So now that I can see what gaps we've got, I want to just come in with a bit of sprue goo just to fill them all in. And I think I mentioned before that the hull on my sample was warped, so what that's led to is the hull's just pulled apart a little bit here just on the stern behind the rudder post. So I'm again using the sprue goo to fill that gap and reinforce it. And when I was actually gluing this together, it took an awful long time to set up, and I think it was something to do with the plastic that Revell have used. So even though I use Revell's contact to cement, it did take a while for the glue to take effect on this plastic, and as a result the warp was pulling this part out at the back here, just right on the stern there. But it's set up, it's nice and secure now. You can see I've put lots of glue on the inside. So I'm going to leave this sprue goo filler to go off now for a good few hours. But while I can't work at the back of the model at the moment, I will fit the foredeck, or the forecastle, and the reason for doing that now is that it'll just add a little bit more strength to the hull, so that when I come to do the sanding at the bottom of the model, it'll flex a lot less, and hopefully it'll keep the join a bit more secure. So we'll get this deck on now. So the important thing here is to get the deck running along the bulkhead here, and because I think of the slight warp in the parts, it's going to need a little bit of force to do that. So I want to be ready with some clamps. So I'm going to start at the back here at the deck brake where it joins the bulkhead, and that's just to make sure that I get exactly the right position of these parts. So I'm pulling that absolutely tight. It's nice and square along the bulkhead. The bulkhead's flush with the deck. I'll just tack the other side as well and really pull that tight. And then, having got this join in the right place, I can then run along the rest of the deck edge and get it all fixed into position. So that's the forecastle deck taped up, and again I'm going to leave that for a good 24 hours just to make sure that it's nice and solid. It'll need a bit of clean up around the edges, but not too much. The main thing with the glue seeping out the edge, it shows that at least we've got a good bond there. And it'll also fill the gaps at the deck edge a little bit as well. So I'm happy enough with that. And then of course we've got all this sprue goo to sand down once it's dry. So a bit more work yet. We've got the quarter deck to fit, obviously, but we'll do that once I've done the internal cleaning of this sprue goo here. So I'm just going to leave that alone for a day and let it completely set up. Then we'll come back and do the next step. I will just put the Revell stand together. That'll just give it something to sit on. This won't be the stand that I use at the end of the build. I'll build a wooden stand, and I don't know what wood I'll use yet, but this is going to be a Canadian ship, so I'm wondering if I might be able to get a piece of maple. Should be quite apt. The two mouldings here on the underside of the hull will get removed. They're just there to locate the model in the correct place on the stand, but obviously we're not going to need that eventually, so she can just sit there, and that's just useful just to keep the model upright. We'll be able to do a lot of the work on the decks with the model in this sort of position. So it's nice to have that stand. So I'm going to leave that to dry now and come back in a day's time probably, do the tidying up that we need to do, and hopefully we'll get some primer on the hull before the end of the video. Okay, so I can remove this tape that's been holding this forecastle deck down. It's dried overnight, so it should be nice and firm. See how much tape we've needed to use. And that was really because of the warp on the hull. But this deck's pulled everything into line now. I'm not going to fit the quarter deck yet. And that's just because I want to check through the Pontos instructions just to make sure that I'm not doing that too early. But it's going to be a good fit anyway. So with the hull having set for probably 24 hours now, I just want to finish off the rest of this transom where I've filled it. So it's just a case of sanding down the sprue goo that I've used. You can see it's needed quite a bit of sanding to get a smooth join on this, because the transom runs pretty close to this plate here, which is raised, so it's just a case of being a bit extra careful with the sander. Don't want to round everything off and have to reinstate this sort of plating. So I'll just carry on for another few minutes tidying up this sprue goo. Then we can think about getting some primer on the hull just to check all the joins. Okay, so I've done quite a bit more work around this transom, and I don't think it's going to be there yet, but it's time, I think, just to check it with some primer. It's very difficult to see what other work you've got to do before you put primer on. It really does show up any faults that you've still got left. I'm sure there will be some. The difficult thing is to retain this plating detail, which I've had to do with a square-edged file. So I've basically gone along like that just to sharpen up the plating, just to sharpen those edges up again, because I had lost some of that in the sanding process. So there's a little bit of work to do still on this. There's various imperfections in the plastic around here as well that are going to need sorting out. Okay, so I think that's as much as I'm going to do for the moment on this. I want now to get a coat of primer on just to see what more work we need to do on that. There will be some more. It's not how I want it yet, but just sanding aimlessly without a target is a recipe for smoothing out and losing the definition of all this plating detail. I don't want to do that. So a coat of primer now. Let's see what that reveals and what we've got to do next. So I'll come in with some Mr. Surfacer 1500. This is grey. And I'm really just going to concentrate on the join lines all the way along the hull. So I've still got some gaps here at the stern, one or two around the transom join here. Okay, so I'll leave that to dry for a few minutes. The Mr. Surfacer dries probably within 10 minutes, although I have put some fairly heavy coats on that, as you can see. but it appears to be reasonably okay. There's still work to do on it, but as I say, we'll let it dry and let's see what we've got to do after that. Okay, so that's the hull in primer. I've gone in and done a little bit more work on the stern. You can see there's a little bit more filler on there, and that's just dealing with one or two pinholes in the first coat of filler that I wasn't happy with. So that should come out nice now. I think I've captured all the gaps and errors in the stern. Over the next few days I'll sand that down and get that just how I want it, and sort the rest of the hull out ready for some paint. So in part 2 I'll go through that painting process, and it will probably occupy the majority of next week's video because it's not a straightforward grey scheme on this vessel. It's a camouflage scheme of 3 colours, I think it is. Plus I've got the decals for the pennant numbers to fit, and that'll involve varnish and matte coats as well. So it'll probably occupy most of that video next week. So that'll be coming up next Friday as usual. The Corvette will replace the hood as the regular maritime build on premiere on Friday night. So I've had a lot of people requesting the Friday night premieres carry on, and I'm going to do that. It's also a big help for me as well, because knowing that I've got a weekly regular schedule helps just keep me on track and keeps the pace of the build going. So that's a decent start for part 1. I think I've got everything done that I wanted to do. And I know that a few of you are tagging along with your own builds of the Revell Flower Class. So hopefully we'll be able to share some hints and tips along the way. So that's it for this one, everybody. I hope that's been of use, and I'll see you next week as usual, Friday night, for the premiere of part 2. So look after yourselves, enjoy your modelling, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.